The night my family offered me everything I had once begged for, I looked at the contract and realized something they did not know. I had already watched that offer destroy us once. My older brother, Adrian, pushed the folder across the dining table. "Take it," he said. "The company shares, the house, the position on the board. Dad is willing to give you all of it." My father sat at the head of the table, his face tired but proud. My mother avoided my eyes. My younger sister, Clara, smiled nervously. It was the exact scene I remembered. The same dark walnut table. The same silver lamp hanging above us. Even a tiny scratch beside my father's teacup was still there. But this time, I was not 27 years old and desperate for my family's approval. I was 35, because I had already died once, and I had already lived through the consequences of saying yes. I stared at the contract without touching it. Adrian frowned. "What's wrong with you?" I almost laughed. 8 years ago, I would have signed immediately. Back then, I thought being chosen by my family meant I had finally proved my worth. I had spent my entire childhood being the quiet son who cleaned up everyone else's mistakes. When Adrian failed an exam, I tutored him. When Clara got into trouble, I took the blame. When my father's business nearly collapsed, I left university and worked beside him without asking for a salary. I never complained. I thought that was what family meant. Then came the night my father offered me the position of chief operating officer. I remember how my hand shook. "You earned this," he had told me. I believed him. That was my greatest mistake, because the position came with one condition. I had to give up the independent design company I had secretly built over 3 years. My father called it a hobby. Adrian called it childish. My mother told me, "Your father is finally trusting you with something important. Don't disappoint him." So I abandoned my company. I handed my clients to a competitor. I closed the office, and I joined a family business. For the first 6 months, everything looked perfect. Then Adrian started making mistakes. Huge ones. Contracts were signed without legal approval. Suppliers were overpaid. Millions disappeared into projects nobody could explain. Whenever my father asked who had approved them, Adrian remained silent. And somehow, the blame always reached me. "Your COO?" my father said. "You should have noticed." I tried to explain. I showed him emails, invoices, approval records. He barely looked at them. "You're trying to protect yourself." That sentence stayed with me for years, because I'd spent my entire life protecting them. And when I finally needed them to protect me, nobody moved. The worst part came later. I discovered Adrian had secretly used my signature to authorize a massive loan. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. "You were going to inherit the company anyway," he said. "What's the difference?" "The difference is that I never agreed to this." He smiled. "You always make things complicated." 3 months later, the company collapsed. My father lost everything. My mother blamed me. Claire stopped answering my calls. And Adrian disappeared overseas. I stayed behind. I faced the creditors. I sold my apartment. I worked until my health failed. And when my father finally understood what Adrian had done, it was too late. He came to my hospital room one winter morning. I could barely breathe. He sat beside me and cried. "I was wrong," he whispered. I wanted to forgive him. I really did. But forgiveness couldn't change the years I had lost. That night, I died alone. And then I opened my eyes. I was 27 again, 8 years before everything collapsed. At first, I thought it was a dream. Then I saw the calendar. March 14th, the day my father had first offered me the position. The day I had once believed my life was finally about to become everything I wanted. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed for nearly an hour and cried. Not because I was afraid, because I remembered everything. Every insult, every sacrifice, every document, every lie, and most painfully, every moment when I had begged people to believe I loved them. This time, I promised myself something simple. I would not spend my second chance convincing people to value me. So when Adrian pushed the contract toward me that evening, expecting the same grateful brother he remembered, I finally understood why the scene felt so familiar. This was the beginning, and this time, I was going to make a different choice. I closed the folder. "I don't want it." Silence filled the dining room. My father slowly raised his head. "What did you say?" "I don't want the position." Adrian laughed. "You're joking." I looked at him. "No." His smile disappeared. My mother finally spoke. But this is what you wanted. I shook my head. It was what I thought I wanted. My father leaned back. You've worked for this family for years. Why would you suddenly refuse? I almost told him the truth. I almost said, because I know exactly how this ends. Instead, I smiled quietly. I'm tired. That answer seemed to offend him more than anger would have. You're tired? Yes. You think the rest of us aren't? No, I said. I think you've all been tired for a long time. Nobody understood what I meant. And for the first time in my life, I was glad they didn't. The next morning, my father came into my room before breakfast. He stood beside the door with his arms folded. You're making a mistake. I continued packing my laptop. I know. You're throwing away an opportunity most people would kill for. I know. His expression hardened. Is this about Adrian? No. Then what is it? I zipped my bag. My life. He stared at me as if I had spoken another language. You're part of this family. I know. So your life is connected to ours. I looked at him. That's exactly what I'm trying to change. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Hurt. Then anger covered it. You become selfish. The words struck deeper than they should have. Because in my first life, those words would have destroyed me. I would have apologized. I would have begged him to understand. This time, I simply nodded. Maybe. He left without another word. I stood alone in the room. On the shelf was an old wooden music box. My father had bought it for me when I was 12. I remembered the day clearly. I had been sick for a week, and he had come home late from work carrying the little box. For you, he'd said. I had wound it up and listened to the tiny melody while sitting against his shoulder. Back then, I thought that moment would last forever. That was the strange cruelty of memories. The good ones did not disappear just because the bad ones came later. I picked up the music box. Then I put it back. I wasn't throwing away my family. I was simply refusing to let old memories become chains. That afternoon, I visited the tiny office I had abandoned in my previous life. It was empty now. Dust covered the desks. A faded logo still hung on the wall. Northline Design. My company. My dream. The thing I had sacrificed because my father said family needed me. I stood in the middle of that empty room and remembered my former employees. Maya, who had begged me not to close. Jonah, who had told me, you're building something special. I had ignored them. I thought family mattered more. This time I called them. Maya answered on the third ring. Hello. It's me. There was silence. Then she laughed in disbelief. Daniel? Yes. Where have you been? I looked around the empty office, trying to figure out how to start again. She didn't ask questions. She simply said, when? I smiled. Tomorrow. For the first time since waking up, I felt something that wasn't fear. Hope. But rebuilding wasn't easy. I had no investors, no reputation, no team, and almost no money. I worked from a rented room above a bakery. During the day, I designed commercial spaces. At night, I studied construction costs, materials, contracts, and business management. Sometimes I slept 4 hours, sometimes 2. But every difficult day felt different from my first life. Back then, I worked because I was trying to prove something. Now I worked because I wanted something. There was a difference. 3 months later, we won our first serious contract. A small hotel renovation. The profit was modest. The project was exhausting. But when I received the final payment, I stared at the number for a long time. It wasn't millions. It wasn't impressive. But every dollar belonged to a life I had chosen. I kept building. 1 client became 3. 3 became 7. Maya joined me full-time. Then Jonah. We rented a proper office. And slowly, Northline became something real again. Meanwhile, my family watched from a distance. At first, they assumed I would fail. Adrian even called me one evening. So, he said, how's your little business? Busy. He laughed. You know you can still come home. I looked through the office window. Maya was arguing with Jonah over a floor plan. Someone was laughing in the meeting room. For the first time, the word home didn't make me think of my parents' house. I know, I said. You should. Why? Because Dad is still giving you another chance. I closed my eyes. Another chance. The irony nearly hurt. I don't need one. He went quiet. Then he said, you'll come back when you realize you can't do this without us. I smiled. I already know I can. He hung up. I didn't think much of the conversation. Not until 2 weeks later, when a major property developer requested a meeting with Northline. The project was worth more than anything I had ever handled. I arrived at the meeting expecting an ordinary negotiation. Instead, the executive across the table slid a portfolio toward me. "We've been following your work," she said. I opened it. Inside were photographs of several projects we had completed, and she said something that changed everything. "We want Northline to design our new flagship district." I stared at her. The contract was enormous. Big enough to transform the company. Big enough to put my name where the industry could no longer ignore it. And as I looked at the projected numbers, I suddenly understood something. My family had never known what I was capable of. Not because I had hidden it from them, but because I had spent too many years making myself smaller so they could feel secure. I signed a preliminary agreement that evening. Then I went home alone. I stood before the old music box on my shelf. For a long time, I didn't touch it. Finally, I wound the key. The familiar melody began. And for the first time, I didn't hear a promise from my father. I heard a goodbye to the boy who had spent his entire life waiting to be chosen. The first time my family saw my name on a business magazine, my mother called me 3 times before I answered. I was standing inside the new Northline office, watching workers install the final glass panel in the reception area. The headline was printed across the magazine cover. "The designer who walked away from a family empire and built his own." I stared at it for a long moment. Then my phone rang again. "Daniel?" My mother's voice sounded strangely small. "Yes. I saw the article. I figured you would. You never told us." I looked at the construction plans spread across my desk. "You never asked." Silence. Then she said, "Your father wants you to come home." I almost smiled. "Why?" "He wants to talk." "About what?" "I don't know." I didn't know, but I wanted to hear him say it. My mother hesitated. "Daniel, whatever happened between us, you're still his son." That sentence used to have power over me. Now it only made me tired. "I know." "Then come home." I looked around my office. The walls were covered with sketches I had drawn myself. The meeting room was filled with people who trusted me because of what I did, not because of my surname. "I'll think about it." She exhaled softly. "Please do." After the call ended, Maya leaned against the doorway. "Family?" "Yes." "Bad news?" "Not yet." She smiled. "That's new." I laughed. Maya had become one of the few people who could tell when I was pretending to be fine. She entered the room and placed a folder on my desk. The developer sent the revised agreement. I opened it. The project had expanded. Our company would now oversee design for an entire waterfront district. It was the kind of opportunity that could change a small firm into a major player. But there was a problem. The client wanted us to partner with an established construction group. Maya pointed to the name, Evercrest. My hand stopped. Evercrest. In my previous life, that company had been one of the largest suppliers to my family's business. And its chairman was Adrian's closest friend. My stomach tightened. I remember a night from years ago. Adrian standing in my father's office. A file open between them. "You could trust them," Adrian had said. I had warned my father that Evercrest pricing was suspicious. Nobody listened. 2 years later, the company lost millions through that partnership. I had blamed myself for not doing more. But now I understood something I hadn't known before. The partnership hadn't been an accident. Someone had deliberately manipulated the contracts. I looked at Maya. "Don't sign anything yet." "Why?" "Because I need to investigate Evercrest." She frowned. "Do you know them?" "More than I wish I did." That night, I went home and opened an old encrypted drive. I had kept it from my first life. Not because I remembered everything. Because some memories were attached to emotions, and some were attached to facts. I began searching through documents I had reconstructed over the past year. Invoices, company registrations, old names, former employees. Then I found something. A consultant named Victor Hale had worked for Evercrest during the same period Adrian had arranged those suspicious contracts. Victor had also been the accountant who approved several payments in my family's company. I stared at the screen. In my previous life, Victor had disappeared after the collapse. I had assumed he had fled, but now I knew where to look. The next morning, I found him. He was running a small accounting office 2 cities away. I drove there alone. When he opened the door, he recognized me immediately. His face went pale. You? Yes. He stepped backward. What do you want? The truth. I don't know what you're talking about. I held up a printed document. Then why did you approve payments from my father's company to 3 shell companies owned by Evercrest director? Victor's hands began to shake. I didn't. You did. I was following instructions. Whose? He said nothing. I waited. Finally, he whispered one name. Adrian. My chest tightened. I had known, but hearing it aloud still hurt. Why? Victor looked down. Because he wanted control of the company before your father retired. I couldn't speak. The room seemed suddenly too small. Victor continued. He knew your father trusted you. He knew if you became COO, you'd eventually discover what he was doing. So he needed you blamed for the losses. I closed my eyes. The pieces connected. The suspicious contracts. The forged signature. The accusations. My father's refusal to listen. Adrian hadn't simply made mistakes. He had built a trap, and I had walked into it because I trusted my family. I opened my eyes. Did my father know? Victor hesitated. No. That answer hurt more than I expected, because it meant my father had been manipulated too. But it didn't excuse him. He had chosen whom to believe, and he had chosen wrong. Before I left, Victor handed me another file. There was one more thing. I opened it. Inside was a copy of an internal message. Adrian had written, "Once Daniel is removed, Father will have no choice but to put me in charge." I read it twice. Then I folded the paper. I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder. Understanding. For years, I had wondered why Adrian hated me. Now I realized he didn't hate me. He feared me, and that was somehow worse. When I returned to the city, my father was waiting outside my office. He stood beside his car without an umbrella, even though it had started raining. I stopped several feet away. You came here. I called you. I was busy. His jaw tightened. You're becoming difficult to reach. I almost smiled. You taught me that. He looked at me. What does that mean? It means I learned not to wait by the phone anymore. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, your mother told me about the project. Yes. You're partnering with Evercrest. Not yet. You should. I studied his face. In my first life, I would have trusted that advice. Now I heard the warning beneath it. Why? They're experienced. So it was the man who stole from you. His expression changed. What are you talking about? I pulled the copy of Adrian's message from my coat. My father read it. His face lost its color. Where did you get this? From someone who worked with Adrian. He read it again. Then he whispered, no. Yes. My son wouldn't. He did. My father's hand trembled. You're lying. I felt an old pain open inside me. There it was. Even now. Even with proof in his hands. His first instinct was still to defend Adrian. I nodded slowly. That's exactly what I used to think. He looked at me. What happened to you? I didn't answer. Because the real answer was too complicated. The person standing before him had died once because he spent his entire life trying to be believed. I wasn't going to do it again. I need you to understand something, I said. I'm not bringing this to you because I want revenge. Then why? Because I don't want history repeating itself. My father lowered the paper. You knew. I remembered enough. He stared at me. What does that mean? I looked away. I've learned to notice patterns. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. He asked me to come home. This time I agreed. My mother was waiting in the living room. Adrian wasn't there. Clara sat quietly near the window. When I entered, everyone looked at me differently. Not like the son who had abandoned them. Not like the younger brother who had become difficult. They looked at me as though I had suddenly become someone they didn't recognize. My father placed the document on the table. Tell them. I explained what Victor had said. My mother covered her mouth. Clara began to cry. I didn't know, she whispered. I know. Adrian's name hung in the room like smoke. My father called him. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. Then Adrian sent a message. We need to talk privately. My father replied. Come home. Now. Adrian never came. By midnight, his phone was disconnected. By morning, he had left the country. That should have been the end. It wasn't. 3 days later, Evercrest filed a legal claim against Northline. They accused us of violating a preliminary partnership agreement. Maya rushed into my office holding the notice. They're trying to stop the waterfront project. I read the document. My stomach sank. There was a clause I had never signed. Someone had submitted a version of the agreement with my digital authorization. It looked perfect. Too perfect, Maya whispered. How did they get your credentials? I didn't answer, because I already knew. The same pattern, the same trap. Only this time, I wasn't alone. We hired investigators. We brought in lawyers. We froze every account. And then I discovered something even more disturbing. The fake agreement had been prepared before Evercrest ever approached us. Someone had been waiting for my company to become valuable. Someone had been watching. That night, I sat alone in my office. Rain tapped against the windows. For the first time since my rebirth, I felt afraid. Not of losing the company, of becoming that old version of myself again. The man who sacrificed everything to protect people who would never protect him. Maya knocked softly. Daniel, come in. She sat across from me. You don't have to handle this alone. I looked at her. Those words were simple, but nobody had ever said them to me when I needed them most. I smiled. I know. She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. You built this from nothing. I looked at her office. No. She smiled. We did. Something inside me loosened. Not every relationship ended in betrayal. Some were built slowly. Some were chosen. And some people stayed because they wanted to, not because blood demanded it. The next morning, our lawyer called. We found the source of the forged authorization. My heart stopped. Who? There was a pause. Then he gave me a name. I knew it immediately. Clara, my younger sister. The person I had protected since childhood. I stared at the phone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, because I had believed I was finally free from the family that destroyed me. But apparently, I had been wrong. The past had found a new way to reach me. I didn't call Clara. I didn't accuse her. I didn't even tell my father what the lawyer had found. I simply stared at the authorization record on my screen until the letters blurred. Clara Vale, my little sister, the girl who used to hide behind me whenever our father was angry. The girl who once whispered, when I grow up, I'll protect you too. I remembered that promise from when she was 9. We had been sitting under the staircase while our parents argued upstairs. Clara had been crying because she thought Dad was going to send me away after I took the blame for breaking a window. I had wiped her tears and told her, don't worry. I'll handle it. She had squeezed my hand. You always handle everything. At the time, I thought she admired me. Now I wondered whether she had simply learned that I would always clean up her messes. I asked the lawyer to send me everything. The authorization had been created from a computer at our family office. Clara had accessed my old company records 2 weeks before Evercrest approached us. But there was something strange. The digital signature wasn't enough to prove she had personally forged the document. Someone could have used her credentials. So I went to see her. She opened the door and immediately froze. Daniel, can we talk? Her eyes moved behind me. Did Dad send you? No. Then why are you here? I looked at her. Because I want to hear the truth from you. Her face changed. What truth? I handed her a printed copy of the authorization. She stared at it. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered, Where did you get that? So you recognize it. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She stepped backward. Daniel, I can explain. I almost laughed. Those were the exact words Adrian had used years ago. Then explain. Clara sat down. Her hands were trembling. I didn't know what they were planning. Who? She looked at me. Adrian. My chest tightened. What did he ask you to do? He called me 6 months ago. Why? He said Dad was going to sell the company. I frowned. That isn't true. I know that now. She began crying. He told me that if the company was sold, we'd lose everything. He said you were going to take control and cut me out. I stared at her. Did you believe him? I don't know. Clara. She covered her face. I wanted to believe him. That answer hurt. More than denial would have. Why? Because you were changing. I said nothing. She lowered her hands. You stopped calling. You built your own company. You stopped coming home. Everyone kept saying you didn't need us anymore. I looked at her. So you helped Adrian hurt me because you were afraid I'd leave? No. Her voice cracked. I helped him because I was afraid you'd become someone I couldn't reach. I sat down across from her. For the first time, I understood something uncomfortable. My family hadn't all betrayed me for the same reason. Adrian wanted power. My father wanted control. My mother wanted peace. Clara wanted reassurance. and I had spent years treating all of their choices as one giant betrayal. But pain had made everything look simpler than it really was. "Did you forge the authorization?" I asked. Clara shook her head. "I gave Adrian access to the old files." My eyes closed. That was enough. "I know. Did you know he was going to use them against Northline?" "No." "Did you ask?" She didn't answer. I stood. "That silence is your answer." She grabbed my sleeve. "Please." I stopped. "Please don't leave like this." I looked at her hand. For years, I had been the person who stayed, even when staying destroyed me. This time, I gently removed her fingers. "I've spent my whole life staying." She began crying harder. "I don't know how to fix this." "Neither do I." Then I walked away. Outside, the evening air felt cold. But strangely, my chest felt lighter. Not because I was happy, because I had finally accepted that loving someone didn't mean giving them unlimited access to your life. The legal battle with Evercrest became ugly. They demanded compensation. We countered with evidence. Victor agreed to testify. Then 2 former Evercrest employees came forward. The case started unraveling. And while the lawyers fought, Northline's waterfront project was nearly canceled. Investors became nervous. Clients called. One even asked whether the company was stable. For 3 weeks, I barely slept. Every morning, I walked into the office before sunrise. Every night, I was the last one to leave. I could feel the old version of myself returning. The frightened man who believed one mistake could destroy everything. One night, Maya found me asleep over a stack of contracts. She woke me gently. "You're doing it again." I rubbed my eyes. "Doing what?" "Trying to carry the entire company on your back." I looked at the papers. "I can't let it fail." "You're not alone." I smiled tiredly. "I know." She shook her head. "No. You keep saying that, but you don't believe it." That silenced me. She pulled a chair beside mine. "Let people help you." I looked at her. "What if they leave?" "Then we'll deal with it." "What if they betray me?" "Then we'll deal with that too." Her answer was so simple that I almost cried. Not because it solved anything, because it reminded me that trust didn't have to mean certainty. It could mean choosing someone while knowing people were imperfect. The next morning, I changed how Northline operated. I stopped approving every decision personally. I gave Maya authority over operations. Jonah took control of project management. We hired an independent compliance team. I stopped trying to be indispensable. And slowly, the company became stronger. Then, 3 months later, the court dismissed Evercrest's claim. Northline had won. But the victory came with another surprise. The developer didn't cancel the waterfront project. They doubled it. Their chairman called me personally. "You handled pressure better than most executives I've worked with." I thanked him. He paused. "There's something else." "What?" "We want you to design the entire district." I stared out the window. The city stretched beneath me. 3 years earlier, I had been working above a bakery. Now my company was about to design one of the largest developments in the region. And yet the first person I wanted to tell wasn't my father. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't Clara. It was Maya. She walked into my office carrying 2 coffees. I held up the contract. She read it. Then she smiled. "We did it." I looked at her. "Yes." She handed me the coffee. "For once, maybe you should let yourself enjoy something before worrying about the next disaster." I laughed. "I'll try." But that evening, another message arrived. This one was from my father. "I know what happened with Clara. I know what Adrian did. I need to see you. Please." I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. "There is something about the past you still don't know." My smile disappeared. I met my father at the old family house 2 days later. The place looked smaller than I remembered. When I was young, I thought the ceilings were impossibly high. Now I could touch the doorway with my palm. My father was sitting in the study. He looked older. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. There were more gray hairs at his temples. His shoulders seemed heavier. He pointed to the chair. "Sit." I sat. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I owe you the truth." I waited. "When you were 27, I knew Adrian was ambitious." "That isn't the same as knowing what he did." "No." He looked down. "I thought I could control him." I almost smiled. "That was your mistake." "Yes." He opened a drawer and removed a thin envelope. "I found this after you left." He handed it to me. Inside was an old letter. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Mine. But I didn't remember writing it. I read the first line. Dad, if you're reading this, I probably didn't have the courage to tell you in person. My heart began beating faster. I kept reading. Years earlier, before the company ever offered me the executive position, I had secretly proposed a restructuring plan. I had wanted to separate the family business from its risky divisions. I had also identified several suppliers who were inflating prices. The plan could have saved millions. My father had received it, but Adrian had intercepted the documents before my father saw them. I looked up. Why didn't you tell me? My father swallowed. Because I didn't know. You're saying Adrian hid this too? Yes. He leaned back. I found the letter in an old file after you left. I realized you had been trying to protect the company long before I accused you. I looked at the paper again. A strange sadness settled over me. All those years, I believed I failed my family. The truth was that I had been trying to save them. But my father hadn't known, and I had been too afraid to demand that he listen. He whispered, I destroyed the person who was trying hardest to save me. I didn't answer. He wiped his eyes. I've replayed that night in my mind thousands of times. What night? The night you came to the hospital. My throat tightened. He continued. You were barely conscious. I told you I was sorry. I remember. His head snapped up. You remember? I realized my mistake. I looked away. I remember enough. He studied me carefully. You've been different since the day you rejected the position. Yes. Why? I didn't know how to explain that I had been given a life nobody else could remember. So I told him the only truth I could safely give. Because I finally understood that being loved by someone doesn't mean you have to keep sacrificing yourself for them. My father looked down. I wish I had understood that. So do I. The room fell silent. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. Can we fix this? I looked at him. I don't know. Can you forgive me? I thought about it. I already have. He looked surprised. But you won't come home. No. Why? Because forgiveness isn't the same as returning to the place where I was broken. His eyes filled with tears. I miss my son. I felt my chest ache. I know. Then let me have you back. I shook my head. You don't get to have the old version of me back. He lowered his gaze. I don't want the old version. Then you'll have to accept the new one. He nodded slowly. It was the first time my father had ever agreed with a boundary I set. When I left the house, Clara was waiting outside. She looked exhausted. I heard you were here. I nodded. Can we talk? I hesitated. Then I agreed. We walked to the garden. She sat on the old stone bench where we'd spent countless childhood afternoons. I testified against Adrian, she said. I looked at her. What? I told the investigators everything. Why? Because I finally realized I had spent my whole life being afraid of losing you. She looked at me. And I almost lost you because of that fear. I didn't know what to say. She continued. I don't expect you to trust me. That will be impossible. I know. She wiped her eyes. But maybe one day, you'll let me earn a little trust back. I considered her words. I don't know what the future looks like. Neither do I. But you can start by living your own life. She nodded. For the first time, I didn't feel responsible for saving her. That was progress. As I drove away, my phone rang. It was Maya. Where are you? Heading back. Good. There's something you need to see. What? You'll have to wait. Maya. She laughed. You've been controlling everything for years. Let someone surprise you. When I arrived at the office, the lights were off. I opened the door. Everyone shouted. Surprise. I froze. There was a small celebration waiting for me. Not for the court victory. Not for the new contract. For something else. Maya walked forward holding a framed photograph. It was the original sketch from my first Northline project. The tiny hotel. The project that had started everything. She had preserved it. Your first dream? She said. I touched the frame. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then she said quietly, You spent so much time proving you could survive. She smiled. Maybe now you can learn how to live. I looked around the room. These people weren't my blood, but they were my family in a way I had never understood before. Not because they owed me anything, because they chose to stand beside me. And standing there, surrounded by laughter, I realized the greatest thing I'd gained from my second chance wasn't money. It wasn't success. It wasn't even freedom. It was the ability to choose who I wanted beside me. Then Maya stepped closer. Daniel? Yes. There's one more thing. She took a breath. I've been offered a position in another city. My heart dropped, and suddenly, the future I had worked so hard to build didn't feel quite as certain as it had 5 minutes earlier. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Maya watched me carefully. I haven't accepted it, she said. I looked at her. What kind of position? Creative director for a major international development group. They want me to lead their design division. That sounds important. It is. And it's in another city. Yes. I nodded slowly. The old fear rose inside me before I could stop it. People leave. People change. People choose something better. That was what my first life had taught me. But this was different. Maya wasn't betraying me. She was telling me the truth before making a decision. I took a breath. You should take it. Her expression changed. You mean that? Yes. You're not upset? I am. She looked surprised. I thought you would tell me to stay. I want you to stay. Then why are you telling me to go? Because I don't want to become the kind of person who loves someone by asking them to become smaller. She stared at me. Then she smiled. That might be the most difficult thing you've ever said. Why? Because I know you mean it. I laughed quietly. Go. She didn't leave immediately. Instead, she sat beside me. I haven't decided. You don't have to decide tonight. She nodded. For the first time, I understood that caring about someone didn't mean securing them. It meant allowing them to choose. That night, I drove home alone. I expected the uncertainty to bother me. Instead, I felt strangely calm. My old self would have panicked. He would have tried to make promises. He would have offered money. He would have found reasons for Maya to stay. But I wasn't that man anymore. 2 weeks later, Northline officially announced the waterfront project. The news spread quickly. Our little company was suddenly being mentioned beside firms 10 times our size. Investors approached us. Competitors called. Former clients returned. And then my family appeared in the middle of it all. My father asked to become a minority investor. I refused. He didn't argue. That surprised me. Instead, he said, I understand. Adrian was still facing legal consequences overseas. Clara had started working independently and had moved into a small apartment. My mother had begun visiting me occasionally. She never asked me to come home anymore. That mattered. One afternoon, she brought me an old box. I found this in the attic. I opened it. Inside were childhood photographs. Me at 6. Me at 10. Clara sitting on my shoulders. Adrian holding a trophy. My father standing behind all of us. I smiled at one photograph. It showed me at 14, holding a cardboard model of a building. My mother pointed at it. You said you were going to design cities. I looked at the picture. I forgot about that. You didn't. She smiled sadly. You just stopped talking about it. That sentence stayed with me. Because she was right. I hadn't lost my dream. I had buried it under everyone else's expectations. My mother reached into the box again. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was an old-school assignment. My future city. The teacher had written, Daniel has unusual spatial imagination. Encourage him. I laughed. That's embarrassing. No, my mother said. It's you. I looked at her. She had tears in her eyes. I should have protected that boy. I didn't know what to say. So I simply said, you can still protect yourself now. She nodded. Our relationship wasn't repaired in one conversation. But it changed. Slowly. Honestly. Without pretending the past hadn't happened. Then came the first major setback in Northline's expansion. A structural consultant found a serious problem in the waterfront project's original land survey. If we continued according to the existing plans, construction could become unsafe. The client wanted answers immediately. The board wanted someone to blame. The press wanted a scandal. For 2 days, I barely slept. Then I remembered the old Daniel. He would have taken the blame immediately. He would have worked alone. He would have hidden the problem until he had a solution. Instead, I called the entire project team together. We stopped. The room went silent. Jonah stared at me. The entire project? Yes. But the cost? I don't care. The client representative looked furious. We could lose millions. If we continue knowing there's a problem, we'll lose more than money. Maya nodded. She had accepted the position in the other city by then, but she was still helping us transition. The investigation took 3 weeks. We discovered the original survey had been deliberately altered. Not by us. Not by the developer. The alteration had been made years earlier. And when we traced the company that performed the original survey, we found a familiar connection. Evercrest. My stomach tightened. It seemed that company had poisoned far more than my family's business. They had been cutting corners across multiple projects for years. Our evidence eventually helped regulators investigate them. The waterfront project was redesigned. The cost increased. The timeline changed. But nobody was hurt. That mattered more to me than the headlines. When the project finally resumed, the developer's chairman told me, most companies would have hidden that problem. I replied, most companies don't get a second chance. He didn't understand what I meant. I did. A second chance wasn't an opportunity to repeat your old life with better decisions. It was an opportunity to become someone who no longer needed the old life. 3 months later, Maya left for her new position. At the train station, she hugged me. I'll miss you. I'll miss you too. You know, you could ask me to stay. I smiled. I could, but you won't. No. She laughed. Good. Then she kissed my cheek. I'll be back. I watched her disappear into the crowd. It hurt, but it was a clean kind of pain. No betrayal. No manipulation. No guilt. Just two people choosing to grow. For the first time, I realized something important. Peace wasn't the absence of loss. It was knowing that loss didn't mean you had lost yourself. 6 months passed. Northline opened its new headquarters. The waterfront district was becoming the largest project of my career. And then one morning, my father called. His voice sounded different. Daniel, I need to tell you something. What happened? Adrian is coming back. I stopped walking. Why? He wants to see you. I closed my eyes. The past had finally returned in person. And this time, I wasn't afraid of it. Adrian arrived on a cold Thursday morning. I didn't recognize him at first. He looked thinner, older. The confidence he had once worn like armor was gone. He stood outside Northline's reception area, holding a small leather bag. When he saw me, he stopped. Daniel. I nodded. Adrian. He looked around. This is yours. Yes. He gave a faint smile. You really did it. I didn't respond. He sat when I offered him a chair. For a while, he simply looked at his hands. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good. He looked up. I deserve that. You deserve consequences. His eyes lowered. I know. The old Adrian would never have said those words. That made me more uncomfortable than anger would have. He opened the leather bag. Inside were documents. I brought everything. What is it? Records from the old company. I didn't touch them. Why? Because there are things Dad still doesn't know. My expression hardened. Tell me. Adrian took a deep breath. When the company started failing, I thought I could fix it. You made it worse. I know. You blamed me. I know. You forged my signature. I know. You let Dad believe I was responsible. His eyes filled with tears. I know. I looked away. I had imagined this conversation many times. In those fantasies, I said everything I had been too afraid to say. But now that he was sitting in front of me, I felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. Why? I asked. He took a long breath. Because I was afraid. I stared at him. Of me? Yes. Why? Because Dad always trusted your judgment. I almost laughed. He didn't. He trusted you more than he trusted me. That doesn't justify anything. No. He looked down. I thought if I could control the company before you took over, I'd finally prove I belonged there. I understood then. Adrian had spent his life competing for a position I never wanted. And I'd spent mine sacrificing myself to keep a family together. We had both been trapped, but only one of us had chosen to destroy another person. I don't hate you, I said. He looked surprised. I thought you would. I did once. What changed? I stopped letting you occupy so much space in my life. His eyes reddened. I wish I had understood that before. So do I. He pushed the documents toward me. There's one last thing. I opened the first file. It contained transfers from the old company. Several million had been moved through accounts controlled by Evercrest. Then I saw another signature. My father's. I looked at Adrian. Dad approved these? Not knowingly. What does that mean? His assistant forged several approvals. I stared at the documents. The scandal had been bigger than I remembered. My father's company hadn't collapsed because of one person. It had been weakened by years of secrecy, fear, competition, and poor leadership. Adrian had accelerated the collapse. but the foundation had already been cracking. I closed the file. What do you want from me? Nothing. Then why come? He looked at me. Because I wanted to see the brother I destroyed. I felt something inside me break. Not because I missed him, because I finally understood that some relationships could not be restored to what they had been. I stood. You should go. He nodded. At the door, he stopped. Daniel? Yes. Were you always this capable? I smiled faintly. No. He looked confused. I became capable when I stopped spending all my energy trying to make everyone else happy. He lowered his head. Then he left. That evening, I received a call from my father. How did it go? He gave me the documents. I heard. There was a long silence. Then my father said, I don't know how to repay you. You don't have to. I want to. Then do something for yourself. What? Stop trying to repair everything. He didn't understand. So I explained. You can't rebuild the past. You can only decide what you do next. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Your mother wants to sell the house. I felt something unexpected. Sadness. Not because I wanted it. Because that house contained my entire childhood. Maybe she should. What about the music box? I looked toward my shelf. I kept it. Why? Because some memories are worth keeping. He laughed softly. I thought you'd thrown it away. I almost did. I'm glad you didn't. So am I. A week later, my mother sold the house. She moved into a smaller place near the coast. My father retired from business. Clara started working with a nonprofit that helped young entrepreneurs. Adrian stayed overseas while the legal proceedings continued. Nobody got a magical happy ending. But for the first time, everyone was living with the consequences of their choices. And I was finally living without carrying them. Then, unexpectedly, Maya came back. She walked into my office one Friday afternoon, carrying 2 coffees. I stared at her. You're back. For good. I smiled. Why? She placed 1 coffee on my desk. Because I learned something. What? I like building things with you. I laughed. That sounds suspiciously like a business proposal. It isn't. She moved closer. It's a life proposal. My smile faded. She looked nervous now. I don't need you to promise me forever. Good. I just want to know whether you want to see where this goes. I looked at her. There was no pressure, no manipulation, no expectation that I owed her an answer. Just a choice. And suddenly I remembered the dining room years ago. My father's contract. Adrian's smile. My mother's silence. The offer that had once looked like my greatest opportunity. I had thought refusing it meant losing my family. Now I understood. Refusing it had been the moment I finally gained myself. I reached for Maya's hand. Yes. She smiled. That's all. For now. She laughed. Fair enough. Outside the window, the city was changing. Buildings rose where empty lots had once stood. Our waterfront district was nearly finished. Northline was no longer a small company trying to survive. It had become something larger than I had ever imagined. But the greatest change wasn't on the skyline. It was inside me. I no longer needed my father's approval. I no longer feared Adrian's judgment. I no longer felt responsible for Claire's choices. And I no longer believed love required me to disappear. For the first time, I could look at my life and say something I had never been able to say before. This is mine. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. I answered. Her voice trembled. Daniel, you need to come to the coast. Why? Your father had a heart attack. The room went still. I tightened my grip on the phone. I'll come. And for the first time since my second chance began, I didn't know whether walking back into my family's life would be an act of love or another mistake. I drove through the night. By the time I reached the coast, the sun was beginning to rise. My mother was sitting outside the hospital room. She stood when she saw me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she walked forward and hugged me. I hugged her back, not because everything was repaired, because she was my mother and she was frightened. How is he? The doctor stabilized him. Is he awake? Not yet. I nodded. We sat together in silence. After a few minutes, my mother whispered, He kept asking for you. I looked at the floor. What did he say? He said he was afraid you wouldn't come. I swallowed. I almost didn't. She looked at me. Why? Because I was afraid that coming back would pull me into the same life. She nodded slowly. I understand. That surprised me. You do. I finally do. She looked through the hospital window. Your father spent his whole life thinking keeping a family together meant keeping everyone close. She paused. But sometimes holding too tightly is what makes people leave. I looked at her. She gave a tired smile. I learned that too late. We waited several more hours. When my father finally woke, the doctor allowed only one visitor at first. I entered alone. He looked weak, much weaker than the man I remembered. But when he saw me, his eyes softened. You came. Yes. He tried to sit up. I stopped him. Don't. For a while, he simply looked at me. Then he whispered, I'm sorry. I pulled a chair beside his bed. You've said that before. I know. Then don't say it again. He looked confused. Why? Because I don't need another apology. What do you need? I thought about it. The truth. He nodded. I was proud of you. I stared at him. He continued. I was proud of you before everything happened. But I was afraid. Of what? That you would outgrow us. The answer caught me off guard. You were afraid of me leaving? Yes. So you pushed me toward the company. I thought if you became part of the family business, you'd always have a reason to stay. I looked down. And Adrian? I thought giving him responsibility would make him feel secure. My father closed his eyes. I was trying to keep everyone. His voice broke, and I ended up losing you. I didn't know what to say, because suddenly the family I had hated in my memories looked painfully human. They had made terrible choices. They had hurt me, but they had also been afraid. That didn't erase what happened. It simply made forgiveness easier. I reached over and adjusted his blanket. I don't hate you. His eyes opened. But I can't become the son you imagined again. I know. I won't work for you. I know. I won't live in the old house. I know. And I won't let family decide my future. He nodded. I don't want that anymore. Something in my chest loosened. My father reached for my hand. I let him hold it. For a few minutes, we sat quietly. Then he said, There's something else. I frowned. What? Your mother and I changed our wills. I immediately shook my head. I don't want anything. You don't understand. He pointed toward the small cabinet beside the bed. There's a document there. I opened it. It wasn't a will. It was a transfer agreement. My father had decided to donate the remaining family assets to a foundation. I looked at him. You're giving away? Yes. Why? Because I spent my life believing wealth could keep people close. He smiled weakly. It can't. The foundation would support young people who wanted to build independent businesses but couldn't afford the initial capital. I read the document again. Why are you telling me? Because I want you to advise it. I looked at him. You don't need to. I know. He smiled. But I want you to. For once, his offer didn't feel like a chain. It felt like trust. I'll think about it. He nodded. That is enough. 2 weeks later, my father was discharged. He moved slowly now. He and my mother settled into their smaller coastal home. I visited every few weeks. Not because I was obligated. Because I wanted to. There was a difference. Clara came too. At first, the three of us barely knew how to speak to each other. Then one evening, she brought an old photograph. It showed all three of us as children. She laughed. We looked ridiculous. I smiled. You were missing a front tooth. So were you. No, I wasn't. You were. We argued about it for 10 minutes. It was strangely normal. For the first time, our family wasn't pretending nothing had happened. We were simply learning how to exist after it. Then came the opening of the waterfront district. Thousands of people attended. The central tower had a huge plaque near the entrance. Designed by Northline. I stood beneath it with Maya. She looked up. You realize this started with a tiny hotel. I know. And you almost gave all this up. I know. What would you have done differently? I thought for a moment. Nothing. She looked surprised. Nothing. I needed to become the person who could build this. She smiled. That's a very mature answer. Don't get used to it. She laughed. The ceremony began. My father was there. My mother. Clara. Even Adrian watched through a private video call from overseas because his legal restrictions prevented him from returning. When I stepped onto the stage, the crowd applauded. I looked out at the people who had helped me build everything. Maya, Jonah, the Northline team, my parents, even Clara. Different people, different places, different chapters. I realized then that success wasn't the number on the contract. It wasn't the building behind me. It wasn't the magazine articles. It was being able to stand in front of everyone who had once defined my worth, and know that I no longer needed their judgment to know who I was. After the ceremony, my father approached me. He looked at the tower. "You built something beautiful." I smiled. "We built it." He looked at me. "You still do that?" "Do what?" "Give other people credit." I laughed. "Some habits are worth keeping." He smiled. Then he hugged me. It was awkward, brief, but real. When he pulled away, he whispered, "I'm proud of you." The words hit me harder than I expected. For years, I had wanted to hear them. Now that I finally did, they didn't have the power I once imagined. They were no longer permission. They were simply words, and I could accept them without needing them. That night, Maya and I walked along the finished waterfront. The lights reflected across the water. She slipped her hand into mine. "Happy?" I looked around. "Yes." "Really?" "Yes." She smiled. Then she asked, "Do you ever think about your first life?" I stopped walking. The question was impossible. She couldn't know. But somehow I knew what she meant. The life before all this. Yes. I looked toward the skyline. Sometimes. "Do you regret anything?" I thought about my father, Adrian, Clara, the old office, the hospital, the music box, the contract. Then I shook my head. I regret the pain, but not the choices. No. Maya squeezed my hand. "Why?" "Because every time I chose myself, I discovered another part of who I was." She smiled. Then we continued walking. I thought the hardest part of my story was over. I was wrong. The next morning, my lawyer called. "Daniel, we found something in the old company records." "What?" "It concerns the contract your father offered you years ago." I sat down. "What about it?" There was another clause. My heart stopped. "What clause?" "One that nobody told you about." The lawyer sent me the document that afternoon. I opened it slowly. It was the original executive agreement from 8 years ago. The position my father had offered me. The one I had rejected in this life. I read the first pages. Nothing unusual. Then I reached the final section. There it was. A succession clause. If I accepted the position, I would eventually become the majority, controlling shareholder of the family business. I stared at the screen. In my first life, I had never known. My father hadn't simply been offering me a job. He had been preparing to hand me the company. But there was a second clause. If I accepted, I would also become personally responsible for all outstanding liabilities connected to the company's subsidiaries. I leaned back. Suddenly, everything made sense. The offer that had looked like my greatest reward had also been the trap that would have tied me permanently to the company's debts. If the collapse happened as I remembered, I wouldn't just lose my career. I would inherit the disaster. I would have been legally responsible for millions. My entire life could have been destroyed, even without Adrian's forgery. I stared at the document. The irony was almost unbearable. My family had called it their best offer. It had nearly become my greatest mistake. I called my father. "Did you know?" There was silence. "Know what?" "The succession clause." He didn't answer. "Dad." Finally, he whispered, "Yes." My chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I thought the liabilities would be resolved before you took control." "You thought?" "I was wrong." I closed my eyes. "You knew I could inherit the debt." "Yes." "And you still expected me to sign?" "I believed I could protect you." "You didn't." "No." His voice broke. "I failed you again." I sat quietly. This was the final piece. The family hadn't merely misunderstood my ambitions. They had been willing to put the weight of the entire empire on my shoulders because they believed I was strong enough to carry it. That was perhaps the cruelest compliment I had ever received. My father said, "I wanted you to have everything." I replied softly, "I already have everything I need." He went quiet. Then I said, "You can stop trying to give me the family empire. What will you do with the foundation?" "I'll help." "In Northline." "That's mine. And us." I looked toward the window. "You're my family." He breathed out. "But we're not each other's owners anymore." He started crying. I didn't. I had cried enough for both of us. A month later, the foundation held its first funding ceremony. We selected 20 young entrepreneurs. One of them was a 17-year-old girl who wanted to design affordable housing. She stood nervously in front of me. "Why did you choose me?" I smiled. "Because you have a good idea. But other people have better grades. Grades aren't the only thing that matters." She looked confused. What matters more? I thought about the boy I used to be. The courage to build something that belongs to you. Her eyes brightened. Thank you. As she walked away, I realized why my father had created the foundation. Maybe he finally understood what I had spent years trying to become. Not someone who inherited a place, someone who built one. That evening, Maya and I returned to the waterfront. She had officially joined Northline again, not as my employee, as a partner. We had spent months discussing the arrangement because neither of us wanted our relationship to become a business dependency. We signed separate agreements, separate ownership, separate responsibilities, and then we went to dinner. She looked across the table. Do you realize how strange our relationship is? How? We started as co-workers. Yes. Then friends. Yes. Then almost distance. That's a strange phrase. She laughed. And now we're partners in business and life. I smiled. Sounds complicated. It is. Still want it? She reached across the table. Absolutely. I took her hand. Outside, the city lights reflected against the water. For years, I had thought happiness would feel dramatic. Like winning. Like watching the people who hurt me regret everything. But it didn't. It felt quiet. It felt ordinary. It felt like eating dinner with someone who respected me. It felt like receiving a call from my mother and knowing I could answer without fear. It felt like visiting my father without becoming his employee. It felt like seeing Clara build her own life without feeling responsible for it. It felt like waking up and knowing my future belonged to me. A year after the waterfront opening, I returned to the old family house for the final time. The property was being demolished. The developers had purchased the land for a public cultural center. I walked through the empty rooms. My childhood bedroom was gone. The dining room was stripped bare. The old study had no furniture. I stood in the center of the house and remembered that night. The contract. Adrian. My father's offer. My mother's silence. The life I had already lived. I reached into my coat. The old music box was there. I wound it once. The melody filled the empty room. Then I placed the music box on the windowsill. For a moment, I considered leaving it there. But I changed my mind. I picked it up. Some memories didn't need to be abandoned. They simply needed to stop controlling the future. I walked outside. My father was waiting near the car. You ready? Yes. He looked at the house. It's strange. What is? Watching it disappear. I nodded. It was never really the house. He looked at me. What was it? Everything we thought we had to preserve. He smiled sadly. You really did change. I had to. He opened the car door for me. As we drove away, I looked back once. Then I turned forward. I didn't know whether the universe had given me another life. I didn't know why I'd been allowed to wake up before my greatest mistake. I only knew what I had learned. The first time around, I thought family was something I had to earn. I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought loyalty meant staying, even when staying destroyed me. I thought success meant being chosen. I was wrong. Family can be rebuilt without returning to the same house. Love can exist without ownership. Forgiveness can exist without reconciliation. And success means nothing if you lose yourself while achieving it. Years later, Northline expanded into several countries. The foundation supported hundreds of young entrepreneurs. My father became a quiet advisor instead of a controlling businessman. My mother volunteered at the foundation. Clara built a career of her own. Adrian eventually completed his legal obligations and began working for a small construction company overseas. We didn't become close again, but we stopped being enemies. Sometimes that was enough. And Maya? She stood beside me through every new beginning. We eventually married in a small ceremony by the water. No business executives, no reporters, no grand family announcement, just the people who had genuinely chosen to be there. Before the ceremony, Maya looked at me and asked, "Are you nervous?" I said, "A little." "Why?" "Because this is the biggest decision of my life." She smiled. "You've made bigger decisions." "No." I took her hand. "This is the first one I don't want to escape from." She kissed me. And for once, I wasn't afraid of what the future might take away. Because I had finally learned that losing someone didn't mean losing myself. And loving someone didn't mean surrendering myself either. I'd already lived through the greatest mistake my family ever made. They had thought their best offer was giving me their empire. But the greatest gift they unknowingly gave me was the chance to refuse it. And by walking away, I didn't lose my family. I found my life. 5 years after the waterfront district opened, I received an invitation that made me laugh. It was printed on thick cream paper. At the top was the name of my father's old company. The same company that had once been the center of every argument, every sacrifice, and every wound in my life. Underneath, it were 4 words: celebrating a new beginning. My father had decided to formally close the company. Not sell it, not rebuild it, close it. The remaining assets had already been transferred into the foundation. The offices were empty. The old board was gone. The family name would no longer appear on a corporate building. Instead, my father wanted to hold one final gathering for the people who had been part of the company's history. I almost declined. Then I saw the location. The old headquarters. I accepted. When I arrived, the building looked completely different. The marble lobby was stripped down. The huge company logo had been removed from a wall. Only a faint outline remained. I stood there for a moment. Maya came beside me. "You okay?" "Yes. You don't have to stay." "I know." I smiled. "But I want to." My father had arranged a small dinner upstairs. My mother was there. Clara was there. Several former employees had come. Even Adrian had joined through a video call. For once, nobody was pretending the past had been perfect. My father stood before everyone. "I spent most of my life trying to build a company that would survive me," he said. He looked around the room. "I succeeded." Then he smiled sadly. "But I failed to build a family that could survive without the company." The room went quiet. He continued. "I confused control with protection. I confused success with security. And I believed that if I gave my children enough, they would never leave." His eyes moved toward me. I was wrong. I felt everyone's attention shift. My father didn't look away. "My son taught me that love isn't ownership." He paused. "Sometimes loving someone means accepting that they may choose a life you cannot control." Nobody spoke. Then he raised his glass. "To new beginnings." Everyone lifted theirs. I did too. Not because the past had disappeared, because it no longer needed to be hidden. After dinner, I stepped onto the balcony. The city lights stretched into the distance. My father joined me. "You really came." I said I would. "I thought you might change your mind." "I almost did." He nodded. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever wish you'd accepted my offer?" I looked at him. The question was simple. The answer wasn't. "No." He smiled faintly. "Not even once. Sometimes I miss the person I thought I would become." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "I thought being the head of your company would make me important. And now I understand that importance isn't something someone hands you." He looked out at the city. "You've become wiser than I was." "Not wiser." I smiled. "Just more tired of making the same mistake." He laughed. Then his expression softened. "I'm proud of you." This time, the words didn't hurt. They didn't make me desperate. I simply said, "Thank you." We stood together quietly. Then he asked, "Do you remember the night you refused the position?" "Yes." "I didn't sleep." "Neither did I." "I thought you hated us." "I didn't." "What did you feel?" I considered the question. "Grief." He looked at me. "Not anger." "Anger came later." I leaned against the railing. "But first, it was grieving the family I thought I had." My father nodded slowly. "And now?" I looked toward the lights. "Now I think we have something better." He smiled. "Something smaller. Maybe, but real." "Yes." He put a hand on my shoulder. Then he walked inside. I stayed outside a little longer. Maya joined me. "Your father?" "Trying." "And you?" "Also trying." She smiled. "That sounds healthy." "It probably is." She leaned against me. For a while, we watched the city. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from the foundation. A young entrepreneur we'd funded had just secured her first major project. Another message followed. Jonah had finalized a new international partnership for Northline. Then another. My mother had sent a photograph of dinner. Clara had replied to it with a joke. I looked at the screen. My family wasn't the family I had once dreamed of. It was messier, smaller, more honest. But it was ours. And that was enough. The next morning, I returned to Northline before sunrise. The office was quiet. I walked into my old room and opened the drawer where I kept the original sketch of that tiny hotel. The paper had faded. The edges were worn, but the lines were still there. I ran my fingers over them. That drawing had been made by a younger version of me who believed he needed permission to dream. I smiled. Then I placed the sketch into a new frame. Maya walked in carrying coffee. "You're here early. So are you." "I have a reason." "What?" She handed me an envelope. I opened it. Inside was an invitation to speak at a university graduation. The topic was entrepreneurship and personal resilience. I laughed. "Why me?" "Because you actually know what you're talking about. I've never given a speech like that. You've survived worse." I looked at the invitation. "Maybe I'll do it." She smiled. That's what I thought. A few weeks later, I stood before hundreds of graduating students. I looked at their faces. Some were nervous. Some were excited. Some were already planning businesses. One young man raised his hand. "What was the biggest mistake you ever made?" The room became quiet. I thought about my first life, about the family contract, about the company, about the forged signature, about all the years I had spent trying to earn love. Then I answered, believing that being needed was the same as being loved. Nobody moved. I continued. I thought if I solved everyone's problems, they would always choose me. I paused. They didn't. A few people laughed softly, but I eventually learned something better. I looked across the room. You don't have to become indispensable to deserve a place in someone's life. The room was silent. Choose people who value you when you are useful and when you are not. Choose work that matters to you. And never confuse sacrifice with love. When I finished, the applause lasted a long time. Afterward, a young woman approached me. "My family want me to join their company." I smiled. "Do you want to?" She hesitated. "I don't know." "Then take time to find out." "What if they get angry?" "They might." "What if they say I'm selfish?" I smiled. "They might say that too." She looked worried. "What should I do?" I gave her the answer I had once needed. Don't choose your future just to avoid someone else's disappointment. She nodded. "Thank you." As she walked away, I realized how different my life had become. Once, I had been the person sitting silently at a family table, afraid to say no. Now I was telling someone else that no could be the beginning of a life. That evening, Maya and I returned home. Our house was small compared with the buildings Northline had designed. We had deliberately kept it that way. There was a garden, a library, a kitchen where we cooked badly together. No security gates, no giant halls, no rooms nobody used, just a home. On the mantel stood the old music box. Maya had asked me once why I kept it. I told her the truth. Because it reminds me that something can hurt you and still have been beautiful once. She understood. She always did. That night, we sat on the porch. I looked at the stars. Maya rested her head on my shoulder. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd accepted the offer?" "All the time." "What do you imagine?" I smiled. "I imagine I would have spent years trying to save a company that wasn't mine. And I imagine I'd still be angry. Would you have met me?" "Probably." She raised an eyebrow. "Probably." I laughed. "Definitely." "Good answer." I looked at her. "But I wouldn't have been ready for you." She smiled. "Why?" "Because I hadn't learned how to let someone love me without trying to earn it." She took my hand. "You learned?" "Yes." We sat quietly. Then I looked at the music box through the window. For a moment, I remembered the dining room. The contract. My father's voice. Take it. The family empire. The life I had once thought I needed. And I finally understood the title of my own story. Their best offer had never really been the company. It had been the promise that if I accepted their version of my future, they would finally make room for me. But I had already lived through what happened when I accepted. I had watched myself disappear. So I refused. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted them to suffer. Not because I wanted to prove I was better. I refused because I finally understood something simple. A life built around other people's expectations is still a prison, even when the prison is made of gold. My family eventually regretted losing me. Adrian regretted betraying me. My father regretted not believing me. My mother regretted staying silent. Clara regretted being afraid. But their regret was never the victory. The victory was that I stopped needing it. I didn't need my father to apologize. I didn't need Adrian to suffer. I didn't need Clara to prove she loved me. I didn't need the company. I didn't need the old house. I didn't need the family name. I had built something they couldn't give me. A life that belonged to me. Years later, when people asked how Northline became successful, They expected stories about investments, contracts, strategy, and design. Those things mattered, but they weren't the real beginning. The real beginning was one quiet word. No, no, I won't sacrifice my future to keep you comfortable. No, I won't accept love that requires me to disappear. No, I won't spend my life proving that I deserve to belong. And once I learned to say no, I finally became capable of saying yes. Yes to my work. Yes to my dreams. Yes to people who respected me. Yes to love without fear. Yes to forgiveness without surrender. Yes to a family that no longer needed to own me. And yes to myself. Sometimes I still remember that other life. Not because I want it back, because remembering reminds me how far I've come. I once believed the greatest tragedy was losing my family. I was wrong. The greatest tragedy would have been losing myself just to keep them. So when my father offered me everything, I walked away. When they expected me to return, I didn't. When they discovered my value, I didn't demand an apology. And when they finally understood what they had lost, I was already somewhere they could no longer reach with guilt, money, or obligation. I was home, not in the house where I grew up, not in the company my father built, not in the family name. Home was the life I had chosen, the people I trusted, the work I loved, the woman beside me, the peace inside me, and the freedom to wake up every morning without wondering whether I was finally good enough for someone else. I'd already lived through their greatest mistake, and because I had refused to repeat it, I was finally living my greatest answer.